I'm ready. Dancing to myself. I'm dancing with myself. Yeah, I love the color of that sweater.
It's a good one. All right, well.
Oh, I really was dancing with myself. I'm dancing with myself. That should be my song one week.
All right, guys, we're so excited to have you here. Can't wait to come on as soon as the sound comes on with this.
Lauren won't let us in. No, I'm just kidding. We're captive back here. Somebody rescue us. Just kidding. We're just waiting for the viewer count to rise before we...
That's really what we're doing.
We don't want to waste all our good dance moves. One time at a dance party, someone told me I had Charlie Brown dance moves.
You had what dance moves?
Charlie Brown.
Well, I did love that post that you put with that one woman and her dance moves. I was like, I was like, oh my gosh, it looks just like your dance moves, Caitlin.
I thought she was my spirit animal because it
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it was just free in a field. So, all right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to In Poor Taste, an irreverent guide to drinking wine. We are your hosts today, Britt and Caitlin. We are super happy, I know, whoop, whoop, super happy to have you here. So, Britt, why don't you tell us what our mission is here?
Yeah, I love that we start off with our mission every episode because I feel like it's like, I just want people to really know, to drive home what it is that we're doing here so that when you find yourself watching, you're just like, okay, I know what I'm getting myself into. We are, like Caitlin said, an irreverent guide to drinking wine. So we want to make wine accessible for all people. I mean, this episode, like, let's up that accessibility for Eastern European wines. But yeah, so our goal, if you've ever gone to a wine shop and felt like you didn't know what you were doing there, or you felt like people made you feel like you didn't know what you were doing there, maybe you're like, oh, I shop at a grocery store and I want to like up my wine game and stuff like that. That's kind of what we're doing here. We want to make wine accessible. We want to make wine enjoyable. We love wine. And why we first started this was during coronavirus. We were missing each other and we were drinking a lot by ourselves. And we thought, let's drink alone together. And we wanted to invite everybody else. So that is kind of what we did. That's our mission and why we show up every week.
In our mock neck sweaters.
I know. We both got the mock necks going on tonight.
I love it. So, as Britt kind of alluded to, tonight we are talking about, well, kind of twofold. We have a guest, which I will let Britt introduce in a moment. But we are talking about the role of the importer in the wine industry. And we are also lucky enough to have somebody who has a little more expertise on the Eastern European wine world than we do. So we're kind of two birds with one stone tonight. If you haven't already opened your wine, get your bottles open. I know I got mine open. Sit back.
I'm ready for like a pronunciation lesson. Like, I feel like that's what this whole episode's going to be. So if you guys are ready for it too, we'd love it if maybe in the comments, just write what you're drinking. If you were able to get an Eastern European wine, even if not, still tell us what you're drinking. We want to hear from you throughout the episode. We want to interact with you. That's kind of my favorite part about this. So let us know. And also, without further ado, I'll tell you a little bit about our guest who's going to be on. So our guest is Eric Danch, and he's really great. I've had the pleasure of waiting on him when I was at a table. And let me tell his bio, and then I'll tell the fun story that kept him so memorable in my mind. So Eric started in restaurants at 15 and inspired a trip to Europe. This was soon followed up a junior year abroad in Copenhagen, which was the most food and drink centric place he had ever lived at that point. After college, he chased a girlfriend who decided to return to work in Rome, where she studied abroad. They ended up staying for nearly a year in Rome, working under the table. Food and wine took center stage again. He then moved to San Francisco and took a leap of faith and joined the circus for 6 years. This was a 3-hour vaudeville meets mini Cirque du Soleil show with a 5-course dinner and wine pairings. He became friends with many of the performers, many of whom were from Central and Eastern Europe. Post-show, they would all hang out, drink, and tell stories. Think honey-peppered vodka and whole pickled tomatoes with an accordion playing Ukrainian juggler. He took 2 wine internships, making natural wine, donkey and goat, and very modern and technical wines at a custom crush facility. He was then introduced to Blue Danube Wine Company and started Completely Green in sales and was a pioneering importer dedicated to Central and Eastern European wine. In 2019, the owners retired and he partnered with Catherine Granger to form a new company called Danch and Granger Selections while honoring and continuing the legacy of Blue Danube. Even though they're still partnering with them, it's a new company with a new approach. So without further ado, let me tell the funny story really quick. When I last saw him in person, we'll just call it that. So I was waiting on him and it was his dinner before he was getting a vasectomy and he called it his balls voyage dinner. And oh man, I reached out to him and I was like, hey, would you like to be on this show? And I was like, that really like seared a memory in my mind. And you're like, oh, it seared other parts of mine later.
Yes, there's quite a bit of searing going on. All successful, by the way. Everything's okay.
Great.
Welcome. I'm hoping that we get to see some Cirque du Soleil move.
Oh, I wasn't sure where you were going to say.
Yeah, that was a segue, I think.
No, I think I'll keep with the circus.
The circus was a great 6 years, and there's actually, I think, a lot in common between those performers and the crazy parts of the wine world. It's like a single dedication to one skill for your whole life. And then you pass it down to your kids. We'd be sitting on the table and you'd have, acrobatics with their 2-year-olds and they'd balance the 2-year-old on their hand and then just drop them and catch them to teach them about balance. And we're just sitting there having dinner together. So, yeah.
Okay, wait, what did you do in the circus? Like, what was your one skill you were dedicated to?
I'm more of a move heavy objects person. So
okay. So you were the big strong man.
Yeah, I was moving set pieces and getting performers different materials, and then we did, as you posted on Instagram, I did wear full makeup and some costume pieces and did dance routines and setups and that kind of thing. So yeah, it was an interesting way to make money.
I can only imagine. That's so fun.
Okay, Caitlin, what's the most interesting way you've made money before, Caitlin?
Me?
Not in a circus, I can imagine.
No, not in a circus. The most interesting way I have made money. That's
Legally.
scary. I'm a little nervous.
I am too, actually. I'm like, maybe you just don't answer that.
Well,
Cool.
I've made some money once taking nude photos for a coffee table book that was like an art exhibit.
Okay, well, there you go.
So I guess that's kind of weird. They were very tasteful, I think.
Look for our calendar later this month.
More taste calendar.
Yeah. Just so you know, Eric, we ask all guests to be in it as well. So.
Okay, well, do you want to talk about what we're drinking?
Yeah. Well, Caitlin, do you want to talk about what we're doing today? Or I know you like to give a nice roadmap so people have some expectations.
Okay, I do. I'm a roadmap. I love roadmaps. So first we're going to talk about what we're tasting and what we're drinking in our wines. So that will be step one. And then we're going to talk to Eric. We're going to ask some questions of Eric about importing. And if you all have questions, you should pop them in the chat. As we get talking, you might think of some questions. We're going to talk to him a little bit about Eastern Europe, and then we're going to ask him what he wants to eat with it, dance to.
What he wants to dance to with his wine.
So if you want to kick us off by telling us what you're drinking, Eric, I'd love to know what you're drinking.
Yeah, I mean, I actually had a tough time making a choice because I was like, what child am I not going to love the most in this situation? But I started off with, there's just certain visits you have where you get back in the car and you just stare at the window and go, what the hell was that? Like just such a different experience, something I'd never tasted before. So much history, so much just like what? And I had that experience with a Frenchman, actually, the first Frenchman to settle in Tokai in northeastern Hungary back in the early 90s. And his name is Samuel Tinon. And he was, like I said, the first, they used to call him the crazy Frenchman of the village, which I think is a little redundant. But anyway, and he was credited by Hugh Johnson, who's of some note, who also, along with a Danish investor, which brings you back to Copenhagen, they founded Royal Tokai Company, which basically produced the first sweet wines post-communism.
Wow.
They would call the wines of freedom, because that was the first time they could do what they wanted after 40 years. And Samuel was on, Hugh Johnson credits him with being the essential person to make that vintage happen in 1990. And then, I've hosted him here. We went to go visit the UC Davis Library, where they pulled out all these amazing historical documents that actually brought him to tears. Because, we got all this information from Europe during the Second World War for fear of it being burned by you-know-who. So, spoiler alert. So, he's a very emotional guy. He's he's deep in history and culture. He's committed, and I had the most powerful couple experiences with him, both in Hungary and here. And also, Tokai in particular, northeastern Hungary, is this giant melting pot. And in a way, he's in a village. It's literally called Little Latin Town. And here he is as a Frenchman. And there's temples and synagogues and churches and all this stuff happening. So I feel like he was kind of continuing this tradition. So I'm drinking his 2009, which is current vintage. It's a thing called...
wow, that's current vintage. That's crazy.
That's current vintage. Well, they take it on upwards of 6 years to in barrel, and then there's some bottle age after that. And this is arguably one of the oldest wines in Tokai. And it's, I think, at least one of, if not the only dry wine made from botrytis, which is the noble rot that makes the sweet wines. So this is and he's kind of, I think, the guy for this. And although people are kind of in his footsteps now, but basically this is, if you like sherry, it's very much like sherry in its immediate sense, but it's not fortified, it's not blended. In fact, the cellars are so humid here, so moldy. I mean, literally, if you look in his winery, everything is covered in 6 inches of mold. There's mushrooms growing from the ceiling. It's crazy. Every year, it's the reverse of Jerez. It actually loses alcohol as it ages, as opposed to the angel share, which ages, as wines go, they lose water and the alcohol goes up. And it starts off as a sweet wine and has slowly walked back to a perfect dry wine. So it has elements of the sweet wine with the aromatics and the fruit and the salt from the volcanic soils. It's high acid, low alcohol, and all natural in terms of it's just one fermentation, no blending, no fortification, no heating, no cooling, no nothing. And I just remember drinking this in Tokai and just being like, what?
It's blowing my mind right now.
Yeah. And this is maybe 500 years old. It's not its first rodeo. And if you look at it, it's just this, golden, Midas touch. And yet it smells sweet and sherry and is dry and high acid. I love it.
Okay. And what's the variety on it?
This is about 90% ferment and about 10% harsh levelu.
Ferment and harsh levelu.
Yeah. They're kind of like the sisters and brothers of Tokai, at least in the modern era. And
there's going to be a test on it, everybody who's watching, so be sure to commit them to memory.
and they have great parentage. The parents go back to Riesling and Chardonnay and Gamay Noir. I mean, they're part of the royal club there.
Well, you definitely know more than I do.
I know. I was like, so should we have made him go last? Because I'm not gonna be saying
I'm gonna make your wine sound super plebeian next to mine.
That's how I feel. I even listened to a whole podcast on my wine, and I'm like, okay, so I hope everyone who's watching is now wishing they were drinking Eric's wine, because that is exactly how I feel right now. I'm like, oh.
But also, don't be disappointed.
And also, and these cellars in Tokai are so magical. I remember there's Tinon's is magical too. It's multiple layers down, no electricity, so it's all by candlelight. You got to walk down there. There's mold over everything. But on that same trip where I went to him, I also went to one of the larger state cellars called the Segit cellar. And it's over 5 kilometers long of straight underground cellar, about 400 years old. They have, giant, just barrels. You have to literally get in a golf cart to drive around. It's insane.
How far down is it? Like underground?
Well, it's an extremely volcanic appellation. So yeah, you go down there, and it's all just carved right out of the rock, and they've got wines from the 1920s to now, all sitting there. And it's a magical place. But anyway, on to your boring wines that I also import.
Well, I mean, if that hasn't got you everyone's interest peaked in like what is coming your way, I really don't know. Like that just made me, I'm like, I should really be drinking more Eastern European wines, and I drink Eastern European wines. Oh, great. Thanks, Karina Gas, for commenting. Eric, you're a beautiful storyteller. I'm really enjoying hanging out with you.
Thank you. All right, well, let's get into it. Who wants to do that?
Well, I'll talk about mine. I'm drinking a 2018 Kadarka. There it is, from Sexgard. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, more. It's easier to remember if you say sex hard.
Yeah, that's what I had in the podcast that I listened to. Who was this person? He was like, it's like sex hard, but take the H out. I was like, all right, sex hard.
And it's sex hard, and then the producer's called is Hyman, so it's really hard to forget.
I know. I was thinking that. I was like, wow, like So I used to work at a campground. A kind of weird job that I had for a couple of years, and one person like checked in, and they gave their name as Buster Hyman, and I was like, sure it is.
Yeah.
All right, like whatever. I'll write that down.
The family is duly aware of the English translation situation.
Okay, got it.
And the whole family's there on the label. That's actually what they look like. If you look at Zoltan Senior and Agnes on the back left, as I'm looking at it, kind of holding each other's arms, and then down in the foreground you have Zoli Jr., his son, and then his brother, and not pictured is actually the wife, and he had a child this year or end of last year. And you can see on the back left, you can see some of the older generations also buried on the family land.
Oh, that's funny.
You can see the casket and the.
I see that. Yes.
Yeah, so it's an evolving label of sorts.
Well, I'll tell you my limited knowledge about it, and then Eric, you can tell us more about it. So, what's really like one thing that I found really fascinating about them is they're like the family who kind of pioneered moving towards indigenous varieties for that region, because Merlot and like French varieties were a big thing because they were following the market, but basically they spearheaded like bringing Kadarka plantings back, as well as Kek Francos, right? And so that I think that they're like kind of at the top of like that appellation. Even the dad is the chairman of the appellation, and kind of like really changing the environment there, which I think was really cool. They do organic. They converted to organic. They do spontaneous fermentation, zero fining, minimal SO2. Their wines are aged in Hungarian oak, clay, and stainless steel. And the son too, the younger son, Zoltan, right? He's really like kind of like taken that like idea of moving back to indigenous varietals as his passion. So, oh, great. Here's me.
It's back to you. Also, I mean, Zoltan is that part of that first generation who got to travel. So he did internships around the world. He got to go to different schools. I mean, he got to see the world. And then in some ways, he came back with even a more like fervent desire to like go back to what the appellation was historically known for. And, they have deep Swabian roots there as a family back to the 1700s. And it's funny because when the first time I met him was in San Francisco, he happened to be in town, looked us up, and I just picked him up and we went driving around to say hi to people. And he's actually really good at traditional Hungarian dance and poetry, and actually did a performance for one of the buyers, which I was like, all right, I'm listening. And he's really charismatic.
He's really going that extra mile to sell his wine.
And this one, we had no working relationship at this point. This is just, who he is. And I went back to go visit the family in Hungary and was just taken by the whole story. And 25 years of finding the right clones, because Kadarka was once one of the most, if not the most, planted red grape in the Hungarian kingdom. And then it's difficult to grow, still, thin-skinned, relatively late ripening, prone to a lot of things. So during the Soviet era, which was all mostly quantity over quality, and people, got paid for how much weight of grapes they would give to the different combinats and things like that, Kadarka went from the most planted to around 1%, literally a couple hundred hectares. And
wow.
So the Hymans, among other notable families in Hungary and also Romania and Serbia and Croatia and Slovakia, where this grape was also present, they've just been like whittling down the best clones, where to plant them, how to farm them, and changing the vine density, the growing, and just told us some amazing stories about how they used to do it at home. Zoltan Sr. told me a story where they would, put the grapes in the open wooden vat, and then as the wine was finishing fermentation, they would cover the top with leaves from the grapevines, and then they would get mud from the vineyard, and they would create basically a mud shell on top of the grapes, and that's how you would seal the barrel.
That's crazy.
If you remember, as a boy, smelling the house filled with the smell of Kadarka when they crack through that shield that was protecting the wines. So there's just a lot of it's just an interesting family, and Kadarka is a bit of an unhealthy obsession for me.
I did know that about you. I feel like
I mean, without hyperbole, and not to be as a humble brag, I'm the largest Kadarka importer in the United States, in that I have Kadarka.
And how many Kadarka importers are there in the United States?
Roughly like 6 or 7 now. It's a bit of an issue that I have. But I just think this is a great introduction to the grape. It's if you're into things like Pinot Noir or Gamay or Lagrein or things like that, it's a light red that you can chill, but also, it's light tannins, high acidity, and it's just like it's also where Sexart is. If you go east across the Danube, you're in like paprika country. And paprika is appellation control. It's very serious in Hungary. And if you have, some of the paprika-laden dishes like the halászlé, the fisherman's stew, or even just a purkult or a gulyás or something like that, you have that in quantity with Kadarka in quantity, and you're off. It's fantastic.
Okay, so I feel like you've already finished, have the the food pairing that I didn't even know I needed with this wine now.
And fun fact about paprika, which I love, is that it's actually where they discovered ascorbic acid.
Huh, really?
Yeah, so they actually won the Nobel Prize for it, and it has like 7 to 8 times the citric acid that oranges have. Wow. So if you actually have good fresh paprika, not that like bottled McCormick's that your mom gave you for deviled eggs once a year, but actually like fresh, ground to order, high quality, it makes you digest all that enormous amount of like lard, tomatoes, onions, which is the basis of most Hungarian food.
Okay.
So keeps you healthy.
Keeps everything moving.
I do only use paprika for deviled eggs, which is a travesty.
I was specifically calling you out.
You can just look at her and see, she only. Don't get me wrong, I love a good paprika on deviled eggs. So yeah. Okay, your turn, Caitlin. Tell us.
Okay, I'm telling you about my wine now.
Yeah.
So mine is, I actually got it for a wine club from one of my favorite shops in town. Shout out to Vino Carta. Earlier this summer, I think. Let's see when they gave it to me. In actually April, so spring. And it was like this dark, what do they call it? It was the dark and vivid pairing. So this was one of the dark and vivid wines. It is a 2017 Picentum Refosk.
Yes.
Okay. I practiced a lot.
Refosk.
If you saw my Instagram, practicing a lot today. Okay. And then from Istria, is that how you say it? in Croatia, which I think I can pronounce. um, and then, so I have this like quote that I think if Lauren can pull it up, I put it up here because I thought it was worth not just me reading it too, but all of you seeing it too. It was so great. I was reading the tech sheets for this wine. So originally built in 1928, converted into war shelter in the early 90s, and now a winery. It's the classic tale of a son of a French woman and an Istrian father growing native Croatian grapes in a Mussolini era concrete water tank. Like,
Right.
classic tale.
Yeah. So,
Tale as old as time.
it truly is. And it actually also was a water bunker on top of that. So it's a one thing.
Yeah.
So Istria is just some place that when you're there, you're like, why am I not here more? I mean, think of like the most iconic, beautiful hilltop towns in like Umbria or Tuscany or, you know, kind of that area. It's just these old oak forests, winding rivers, and then these hilltops with the classic wall, the town built up to the church and the steeple. Mm-hmm. But you're in Croatia, so everything is like much cheaper, less touristy, and you're also in the heart of like Croatian truffle country.
Yeah, I read that.
You can stay at like a little, you know, mom and pop's inn, get breakfast in the morning, and it's just a slew of eggs just doused in truffle, and your night and the breakfast is like €30, and you're like, wow.
Oh man, why am I not in Istria? That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
Well,
Don't tell anyone. But and Dimitri is both the kind of like Zoltan Hyman and even Tinon. He's of this generation where he's traveled. He worked in Burgundy. He's been other places. He's seen how it's done. But he went back to his father's side because he saw this amazing potential in Istria, kind of untapped, undone. And, you know, people in this area, even though it's been, you know, Venetian for 500 years, I've been in cellars in this part of the world where you go deep into the cellar and you've got like wines where it says product of Yugoslavia, product of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, product of Italy briefly, and then also product of Croatia. And you're like, and it's the same house, like nothing's moved, you know, just the borders keep going back and forth and back and forth. And I feel like whenever you have that many border contentions, it just makes for interesting people and wine. You know what I mean? Because no one wants to admit they're heavily influenced by anything, which of course they are completely the product of being heavily influenced by everything around them, which is what makes them unique. So I think Dimitri's a great example of this. And yeah, you're in this old, you know, war bunker water shelter dug into the side of the hillside. It's freezing in there. He often has to roll the barrels out in the heat to get them a little bit, you know, get the fermentation going if they get a little stuck.
You're stealing all my good points.
He just checks all the boxes for being a really, you know, a great person. And you know, we went to his winery and just had some of the best food I've had. And so one of these, you know, these border areas are so great because they show their local pasta and they go, "This is fuge, the pasta," and you're like, "Fusilli." They're like, "No, fuge," and you're like, "Oh, all right." Like everyone, you know, it's like talking about like spätzle versus gnocchi. It's like, okay, they're different, but they're more or less the same thing. So but you have it with like rabbit and truffles and all the local cheeses, and it becomes definitely like this Croatian thing. And Raposhk and another grape that's very similar but different called Teran is amazing in the same area. And then his Malvasia, which again is one of these grapes that there's Malvasia everywhere. You know, she's gotten around, but this is a unique clone and a unique grape in Istria. And he makes it with a few days of skin maceration, so it's like a baby skin contact wine, and it's just like salty and aromatic, and it's just wonderful. You want to go there?
Okay.
Should we just like relocate there and then just do our wine show from there?
I know. Well, Caitlin, we are looking for new spots, so maybe Istria is where it is.
And, and then you're only, you know, you drive down to the coast of Istria and you can catch a ferry and be in Venice in half a day. You know,
perfect.
Well, get on a scooter depending on your abilities, and you could just drive to Italy. It's right there.
I would be lying if I said I did not Google is Istria a country.
No.
Nice.
Google will probably autofill it anyway, assuming you don't know. I mean, Istria is this giant, like, sawtooth peninsula into the Adriatic. And it's a really fascinating place because it was kind of Venetian for so long, but then Yugoslavian, and then the port city of Trieste was actually Hungary up until the 1920s after the World War I, where they chose poorly, and it went back to Italy. So yeah, it's been a lot of things.
That's so crazy.
I feel like wine like that, Refoge, and also his Teran. It's like when you go to a really good restaurant that's really specific. Like you have like Laotian food, and you're like, God, I gotta go to Laos. Like, what is going on here? You know what I mean? And I feel like I want the wines that have that same thing where you taste the wine and go, we should go here. Like, you know, I want to like drink the wine, eat some of the food around here, and then just start Googling flights. You know?
Well, okay. I mean, I feel like that leads us into a great question.
I'm not done.
Okay, Caitlin, tell me all the stuff that you researched about this wine.
Sorry, I have two more things to say about this because I think they're funny. So, like Eric mentioned, I did read that it was such a cool climate or like a cool area for this wine to be made that they had a hard time having spontaneous fermentation because you need warmth for that. And they were talking about how they have to pull fans in to pull the warm air in to start the fermentation. Yeah. So that's funny to me. It's cool. And then also kind of speaks to like a very like organic, natural style of making wine. Like, you know, they're not heating it up. And then I love this. So here is, well, for one, sorry, two more things. One of them, it was apparently this varietal is often given in this part of the world was often given to women after childbirth because of the high iron content. So I was like, I'm here for it. I'll take this.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay. Like that is what I'm going to be drinking once a month.
Yeah.
From now on is Refoge.
Yeah.
So that was cool.
It's for all those anemic ladies out there. Yeah, and also the iron goes both ways.
You just have to, you know, get your menses and you just drink Refoge. Like we don't need anemia to be drinking that wine.
I mean, also the great lover of Venice, Casanova, wrote in his journals about drinking the Eastrian red wines, Teran and Refoge, because part of his, you know, because the iron goes both ways. It replenishes, it also giveth. So if a man wants to be ready for a night on the town, a bottle of Refoge will help you get to that place.
Oh my God. This is my new, like, you know, first date wine or something. Maybe third date wine.
There's also a great drink, which it was given to me as more of a hair of the dog, because it's called Istarska Zupa. And again, this is one of those things that happens to you. I have no idea this is fully true or not, but I was told by the people around me this was true, so I took it as true. But it's basically a soup they make you after a long night, and we had a bit of a long night getting into the spirits and things. And it's basically all the day-old bread from the day before, all kind of croutoned up. They pour all the Teran and Refoge from the day before, lots of cracked pepper, and then a lot of olive oil. And they heat it up in this little clay jar, and then you drink it. And it does things. I can't do it, but the amount of pepper and the high acid olive oil and the wine, the bread, it is like, you know, it's like a needle through your chest plate kind of thing. It just brings you right back.
Yeah, 3 times, right?
I did.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have two.
Wait, I have one thing that's really interesting about your wine too, Caitlin. And I actually tuned into another like thing that Eric was giving a while ago. And what I really liked about the label is, didn't that show like the amount of rain per month year?
Dimitri would be so mad if I didn't mention this. Thank you. He spent a lot. So so for him, you know, he farms everything organically. He's got all the right spots, but those dots are basically a gauge of the precipitation for the vintage. So on the top left is, I believe, October of the previous vintage. And then counting, you know, going left to right, it brings you to the harvest in September.
Mm-hmm.
You can see for this vintage of 17, a little risky towards the end. You don't want a lot of rain at the end of the vintage. But if I were to show you like a 15, it would be all small dots because it was a huge drought year. And for him, you can really tell, especially if you have a lot of his wines all together, just by looking at that, you can already kind of know what the tannin, acid, alcohol, all that stuff is kind of laid out because his winemaking is so honest to begin with.
Well, it's so funny. I think about like, you know, reading Jancis Robinson's like thing on like vintages, and I'm like, I'd rather just see it on the bottle when I'm drinking it. Like, okay, what did this vintage actually look like? So
yeah, it's funny to look at it.
yeah. Okay, Caitlin, we should move into the question. I know
we have two main questions for you.
Two main questions.
The first one is, we want to understand your role as an importer. So what is it that you do as an importer? What do you do? Tell us.
Beyond that, like, how do you choose the wines that you choose? Like, what makes a wine? I mean, obviously wines are compelling and different ones can be that, but like, how do you find them? How do you like, there's obviously a huge process to bring them into the US, and like, and there's like a huge barrier, like language barrier and all this stuff. Like, this just blows my mind. So maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, and without making myself angry in the process, especially when we get into bureaucracies. No, I mean, when I first started traveling with Frank, who owned Frank Dietrich, who owned Blue Danube, I was very much just like a baby bird in it. I was just like watching him, being like, what's going to happen? So we would just drive into these appellations, and again, at this time, you look at the kind of iconic wine books, your encyclopedias, or whatever. There'll be 35 pages on the Jura and 1 page on like Eastern Europe. Like, there's just not that much given and not much current. And obviously, a lot of stuff is happening as we're speaking. Like, between publication and new wineries coming around, there's almost no time to be in front of it. So it was a combination of like, being in like a wine bar in Budapest and just, ordering a bunch of samples or a bunch of glasses off the list and turning the bottle around and being like, huh. Taking a picture of the bottle, look at the address, there's a phone number on it, we call it. And also, the more people you meet, you get connected, right? So like, when we were in the aforementioned Tokaj, one of the first places I got to visit with Frank was the Botpinze, which is Judith and Josef. And Judith, one of her best friends, is this other woman, Stephanie Perez, and we went to go see her and loved her wines. She's like, oh, you got to see my friend Schatzi. So we go over and see Schatzi. And all of a sudden, you realize these women actually make a wine together. And you're just kind of piecing this together in this kind of ignorant way, but kind of following your nose. And also just following like good people. It's kind of like speed dating. Like, even the wine's good, you're like, no, I don't want to have to come here and see you every year. I don't want to correspond with you. I don't like your, whatever it is, your politics, your vibe, whatever. I'm not having it. So there's a little bit of like because I think that the best importers that I've seen have this great longevity with their producers. They kind of become part of the family, which is amazing, which is, you see the births of children, the marriages, the deaths, and you're kind of in this kind of outsider way, you're kind of getting this inside special access to a faraway place. Mm-hmm. And the wine is so central to them that it really does hit those, when you get invited to like the family table and you're bouncing someone else's kid on your lap and the old man's telling you a story, you're kind of like a visiting boyfriend in a way, trying to weasel away into the family. So I feel like we met a lot of people that way. And then obviously with the rise of social media, there's more connections you can make. If you see something, you can kind of just reach out and see what's going on. But more or less, you have to just go there, park your car, and just start walking around. And, one of my favorite appellations to visit is called Somló in Hungary. Mm-hmm. One, basically, it's an appellation, but there's maybe one volcano. It's maybe 570 hectares. It's tiny. There's over 1,000 growers on it. It's a nightmare. And they didn't even have streets built until I think 2014. So you go in the wintertime, you park at the bottom and you hike it up. And you just stay at these people's houses and you meet them and you hang out with them, and it works, it doesn't work. You just figure it out. So it's like, I think the adventure of it is very appealing, but it's different than Western Europe where we kind of know who the iconic people are. Mm-hmm. Like if you're going to go to the Northern Rhone, there's a few people you should probably taste with to get a sense of the appellation. And we kind of know who those people are for the most part. Here it's just like, I don't know, like who is the person? It's not even entirely known over there. So I feel like it's a lot of meeting the right people, they connect you, and then a lot of sometimes just dumb luck. And there are some wine fairs, and there are some of those kind of things, but those I feel like are more for I don't know, they don't really work for me in the same way. And there is this rush to like get things to market and own a brand and that kind of thing. And that's a competitive side, which is now starting to happen in this part of the world. But back 8-10 years ago, no one cared, at least over here.
Okay, Caitlin, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, for all of our viewers who don't know what it means to import wines, like how do you fit in to the wine that they have in the glass at their house now? Like what is your role in the supply chain?
Yeah, here's where we, ruin the entire romance of the wine business. No, I mean, you obviously have to figure out and agree on the pricing and everything else, but then you have to get the labels approved by the U.S. government. You got to have, certain font sizes, certain information, certain generals, this, that, and the other, alcohol, this. You can't claim you can't claim this wine will fix your pregnancy, even though the Refoche does. You can't make that claim, right? And then it's the hardest part is actually once you have the labels all approved and you get the lab tests, you have to get FDA numbers approved. You have to get all these different paperwork so the U.S. government knows what this is. And then you have to organize shipping, which is really where most of the logistics get sunk. Not literally sunk, but
financially sunk.
We actually last year on the first year of business as the new company, we had an entire container, almost 1,500 cases, miscategorized as meat in Slovenia, and they froze it to -30, and every single
no. No.
Yeah, I said different words, but it was the same gist.
Okay.
So there are those hiccups, and then
heating? Like, can you come back from freezing, but you can't come back from heating, or can you not come back from that either?
Literally, the bottles exploded. No, you do not come back. And also, my wines are largely, unfined and filtered. There's, they're not they're not durable goods. So we've had some absolute tragedies, but basically we have to consolidate in a port, whether it's in Slovenia or in Budapest or in Vienna, and that can be tricky. Getting wines out of Serbia and Romania is difficult. A little bit of hand holding that goes on, and then once the wines are consolidated onto a container, it gets shipped to a port here in the United States. For us, it's Oakland. And then it gets picked up, and then we use a warehousing, person in Napa, and basically they have our wine, and that's who delivers it, that's who invoices it, and we all pay each other in a perfect world. So it's not just finding the wine. I mean, to actually get the wine properly labeled, approved, consolidated, loaded, shipped through customs, tariffs under our last 4 years. There's all these things that can happen.
Well, and then, so what happens then? You have reps who sell them to restaurants and wine shops. Is that the next step?
Yeah, I mean, ideally. Early on it was mainly, and it is still me to a large degree. But yeah, we it actually takes it's like, think of your 1960s vacuum cleaner salesman. You have to put a bunch of wines in your car.
Okay, so you told me on this romantic idea, but now I just see you as a vacuum cleaner salesman.
Or Tupperware, what have you. But as we know, restaurants and wine shops are all crazy busy. You guys have both worked in that world, so you have to make an appointment with a wine buyer or whoever that person is, and then you literally think about their list, their wines, their food, their clientele, and you kind of look around and go, I guess I'll bring them these wines. And then you open them up and you drive them around your car and you sit with them and you taste, and hopefully it works. I mean, it's amazing the whole system functions, to be honest, because there are literally thousands of reps, lots of different companies. And as you know, the By the Glass list is 6, 10, 15 long on average. And not to mention the literally thousands of domestic wineries that are also vying for that same spot. So it's a remarkable environment, really.
It's interesting to hear you talk about your relationships with kind of the winemakers. And I have worked with you in other capacities as well, beyond waiting on your Balls Voyage dinner. And like how you kind of create that same relationship, at least with me, how I felt like it was like, oh, I want to work with you because you're such a wonderful person. And like, you have great wines, but two, it's also like just like this like personal connection that is so important in the wine industry as well as in kind of sales. And so I see that translating from this end of the like supply chain to the further end as well.
Well, thank you. And also people want to get close to the source, whether it's, like naming the farmer who made the greens for your salad, you know what I mean? It's like, you want to kind of remove as many obstacles between you and the buyer so they feel like they're actively engaging with that winery in some degree. And, it makes it more meaningful. Like, like when a producer builds like a skate park based on the funds from wine exporting and they tell you about it, like, it's not, it really happened actually.
I believe it did. I felt like you didn't just pull that out of nowhere.
No, with Bott and Tokai, a lot of the money they got from importers, not just me, but many others, it built like a skate park in their village for the kids. And again, that's not transmutable in the wine. It's not part of the terroir. But it adds kind of value and meaning to what we're all doing. And if you don't tell those stories, no one's ever going to know. I mean, I think there's plenty of good wine in the market. But if it doesn't have a good kind of origin story and community and something about it, then I think it's a hard pass.
Okay, so let's move on to the next section, Caitlin.
Real quick, have you guys seen? Have you guys seen the Portlandia episode where the people are sitting down to dinner and they are like asking about their chicken, where it came from?
Yes.
Yeah.
His name is Kevin. Like, well, you know what? We want to go to Kevin's home and really meet them. So yeah.
I joke.
Well, as with most of India, there's mostly truth to it. So yeah.
Yeah, it's good. Okay, so now that you've shared a little bit about like what the role of the importer is and kind of how you select your wines, we are going to try to do a brief discussion. Just
very brief. We are at 47 minutes. I want everyone to be aware.
13 seconds. Well, or 13 minutes. But no, just a brief overview of like what the heck is Eastern Europe? Like what are we talking about? So we don't need a deep dive, just like what countries are we talking about?
What countries are we talking about? What grapes are we talking about? What regions are we talking about?
Yeah.
Like spark notes.
Yeah, I mean, painting in horribly broad strokes.
I'm taking a test afterwards.
Okay, I didn't hear either of you, but
you think of basically everything more or less east of the Iron Curtain. And when that includes the former Yugoslavia, the USSR, it's kind of when you look at the map of the world and the United States isn't at the center of it. You have to like recalibrate. So if you think about it, looking at like Budapest is just kind of, at least for us, a focal point. And then you go north into Slovakia. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of Austria that is historically part of Hungary and very close in so many ways. You have Slovenia to the left, Croatia due south, as well as Serbia, and then Bosnia below that. And like we're just starting with a Romanian producer next year, which is very exciting. And then east, it gets a little bit trickier when you get into like Ukraine and Bulgaria. It's just a different world. But I think what's important though is that we kind of think of the former Soviet bloc as just one thing. Each country, Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, then Czechoslovakia, Hungary, each of them dealt with the dissolution of the Soviet bloc in a different way. Like they all found their own way out of communism. So they're actually really distinct countries. Like Hungary had a unique situation that's different from Romania and Bulgaria, or different from Moldova. It didn't just happen in one blanket way. So, I'll keep it tight here. But basically, because it was so pragmatic during the Soviet era, it was like, okay, you're going to make this kind of wine and you're going to make a lot of it. And you're going to grow this kind of thing and a lot of it. And that's going to feed the whole block. But you're going to get tractors from over here. You're going to get workers from here. So it was very much a quantity over quality. Mm-hmm. And obviously, privatization went away. So if you have, an appellation that's very much like, Hungary is very much like what we think of Burgundy. All these familial small plots handed off over generation and generation. All of a sudden, all that fruit, apart from a very small amount reserved for home winemaking, goes to the local cooperative.
Okay.
and you're paid on weight. So you might have had some beautiful old vine Kadarka. Screw that. Plant some Chasselas. Get some Müller Thurgau in there. Get some grapes that like pump it out, or different clones that are more for disease resistant or thicker skins or whatever it was. So you had this 40 plus year movement of forget your local varieties. The vine density was horrible because they actually had to use Soviet era tractors, which were like 20 feet wide. So you're driving down these huge avenues, and again, you had a beautiful vineyard on a terrace or up in the woods. No, you can't farm that you can't farm it industrially. So I've actually been in vineyards where you're walking into the forest and you start stepping over terraces and wine growing up into the trees. And you're like, oh yeah, this was basically a Grand Cru site 60 years ago. So people are now actually clearing 50-year-old forests and recovering and uncovering traditionally important sites and replanting those grapes there. And yeah, the grapes are unique in this part of the world. You've got, even with the few grapes we've mentioned, there's not a wide variety of those elsewhere. So, Hungary has its own set of grapes. I often joke that I want to write a book about the Ottoman Empire, in that they didn't drink wine, but they completely shaped wine, because wherever they attacked and occupied, it pushed grapes and people to all these amazing places, and wine survived it all. Again, I'm going to go way deep on that, so I'm not going to get into it.
Yeah,
It does lead to our song, though. It leads to our song.
Great. I feel like one of our viewers was like, these wines are pairing well with my 20th century history degree. Yeah.
It's finally come into use, Lauren. So I think that it's a movement back to the native grapes of the area, planting them where they were supposed to be planted. And, during the Soviet time and even the Yugoslavian time, they could take your land. I mean, I feel like I'm going to give a Braveheart speech here. They can take this, they can take that. But, the things you can't remove are basically your language.
But they'll never take our wine.
and your wine. So when things became free again, they were like, we're going to speak Hungarian or Slovakian or whatever it is, or Romanian. We're going to make these foods and we're going to drink these wines, damn it. And that's the era that we're in.
Okay, so this episode go like an hour longer, but Eric, you really need to start drinking a lot more. You have not been irreverent enough and haven't been drinking enough, but I feel like this drunk history is the drunk history I want to pay attention to.
We can do a 2-hour show and start it at like 9 o'clock, and I will be right there. So I think that this is actually, apart from pre-World War I, pre-phylloxera, like this is the best time to be drinking these wines in the last 100 years, literally.
Cool.
And actually, some of the wines, the lower part of Hungary, called the Pannonian Plain, and that goes also down into Serbia. That was the bottom of the old Pannonian Ocean. It's pure sand for the most part. So that down there, you actually have pre-phylloxera vines. We import some vines in the 1880s. So you actually are drinking. You can drink some of the wines that predate all the mess I just talked about. Which is awesome.
Okay, well, I feel like that's a good. Wait, what were you going to say, Caitlin?
Oh, I was going to say, just in recap, it sounds like the role of the importer is basically a badass, but there's a lot
really quick. Before Caitlin finishes, I just want you to know, Eric, that she is a communications professor, and that is why she's recapping our session right now.
Well, I just like to, wrap up.
I like it. Keep us on track.
I know.
A lot of stuff that got said in there. So as far as Eastern Europe, it sounds like we have tons of different countries. You named a bunch of them. And every country has a bunch of different indigenous grape varieties. So if our viewers have never heard of those grapes, that's not because they don't know about wine. It's just because they don't know about Eastern Europe. And there's just
they're on their way back. They were like totally out of fashion only because the communists, man.
Yeah. So,
hashtag. And I also think that in a way, it's not that these wines are better, or it's just that in some ways I feel like drinking these Eastern European wines, whether it's a Kadarka or a Haschlevelu or a Ufark or a Cuvée or whatever it is, or a Grundspitz, or there's so many different grapes, right? They actually make you re-like the grapes that you already know. Like you drink enough of those kind of wines, and you're like, hey, my Zinfandel is pretty rad, or my Chablis is pretty rad. Like I I think it's kind of like getting out of your routine. Like if you do the same takeout and make the same food every night for a month, you're like, I don't like food anymore. Like it's just I've lost
my world. I feel like lately.
Yeah. Like if I do the same nude coffee table calendar every year, it doesn't work out as
changes every year, Eric, just so you know.
So I think in a way that it's a great way to give you a nice hard reset on how wine can taste, and then it can make you fall back in love with the stuff you're already acquainted with. And the wine world is so vast. I mean, there are entire places I haven't even been to in these countries. You know, I'm supposedly an expert, and I hadn't even been to all the places yet.
Yeah, it's so much to cover. So I just wanted to say that it's an exciting time to drink Eastern European wines. So if people are like, what is the deal with Eastern European wines? It's adventurous. Get out there, try them. We're not experts. No one's
out there. And also there's a lot of value to be had in Eastern European wines, like compared to like a Kadarka, like Eric was mentioning, you like Gamay, you like Pinot, like great, like alternative. And really like, I think these are really value driven wines. So check them out. Well, okay, Eric, now we're on to our like last section. What do you want to listen to, dance to? Okay, should we start with eat? What do you think, Caitlin?
Okay, well, yeah. What do you want to eat with the wine you're drinking right now? I think you can told us a little.
Tokai is a land of like the best goats ever. They have, serious goat culture, and they just
of all time.
Yeah, they braise the goats where you just look at it and it just a slice of the meat just slides right off the bone. That kind of goat and a wine like this is the best.
Okay. Oh, that sounds good.
So what do you want to listen to while you're drinking your wine?
So I think it's a character flaw if you don't listen to like Balkan brass Romani music and not want to like move and drink. I think something's like fundamentally wrong. So let's listen to a song that, for me, it's a band from, I think, North Macedonia. They are using a bunch of Balkan, ex-Yugoslavian, Balkan brass instruments with Romani gypsy rhythms. And then it's actually a song taken from the Turkish army.
I mean, let's talk about a confluence of things just like this country.
And then the first time I heard it was by a band named Beirut, which held a special place in my heart in college.
Eric. I know, you have to dance. That's the whole point of this.
If you're in a small pub or even a subway station and that kind of music starts, everyone goes crazy. Everyone goes crazy. It's the best.
I love it.
Nice.
So, Britt, what about you? What do you want to eat with your wine?
Well, I had been thinking about this, and there's like this. I was like talking to someone about it, and I feel like, especially this one for other Kadarkas, has a lot higher acid even than some other ones that I've had before, and I feel like there's like this sauerkraut stew that has like tomatoes and like sausage, and I feel like it would go perfect with this wine. It's like I feel like sometimes when I talk about what I want to have with it, I have not eaten by the end of this because I want to be like drunk history Brit by the end of the episode. So I don't eat before the episode, I only eat after, but most of the time I'm like, okay, so I think I'll be making that after this episode and drinking it with the like one little glass I have left. So that's what I'm feeling like today.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah.
Actually, and having big fatty soups, they will actually brighten it up by pouring in some of the brine towards the end of cooking from sauerkraut. It's a delicious thing to do to yourself.
Yeah. The acid's so high in it, I feel like it would just like partner perfectly. What I want to listen to, and let me just give you a little preface before. I put the song from the Beatles, Back in the USSR, but I'm thinking more back from the USSR because Kadarka is coming back from the USSR. Yeah. So
small prepositional change.
Yes, exactly. Small one. Changes just a little bit of the meaning.
Yeah.
But anyway, I want to listen to that and dance to it while I'm drinking this. So let's see. Oh no! I don't know what this is.
That's a remix.
It'll work. Here we go. You know, I feel like you have to pay for like the expensive one to not get the commercials, and we're not there yet.
There we go.
I feel like I have the perfect hair for this right now.
I think you do.
Not so much.
Okay, Kate, what do you want to eat with yours and what do you want to listen to with yours?
Okay, so earlier I read something about my wine. I'll just give you a real brief synopsis. It said, this wine has the remarkable ability to seem incredibly pungent on the nose, coat the inside of the glass like cough syrup, and yet deliver a light-bodied, low-alcohol wine with acidity.
That does sound like my tasting notes.
Built with acidity for the Istrian prosciutto. And then it says that happens to hang from the roof inside the winery. And then once I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, all I want to eat with this is charcuterie, prosciutto. I want Istrian prosciutto. I don't even know what that means, but I want it. Blood sausage.
They call it prosciutto. And you go, you prosciutto, and they go, no.
No.
The other one, I'm not really implied. Yeah.
Call it whatever you want. I want it with this wine. So, yeah.
That'd be a proper combination.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you want to listen to with it?
If I tell you, I'm gonna have to kill you. No, actually, I just can't pronounce it, so I'll let Lauren play it.
Okay, this is not the KGB, Caitlin. That's Russian.
Okay, it is called Proleka de Jusa Slovenska by Zaklonis Prepeva.
Why do you think I picked Back in the USSR from the Beatles? Because I can pronounce that shit.
We have very different approaches to this challenge. Oh yeah.
I hope you're going to translate this for us by the end of this dance thing. Eric, not you, Caitlin. I know you're not going to.
There's a good rock scene over there.
Yeah, it was great. I liked it. I was like, you know what? It was kind of a stumper.
Kind of has that like. It kind of has that Hasselhoff on the Berlin Wall feel to it. You know what I mean?
Yes, it really does.
Yeah.
I asked my friend Alan, who's on the show tonight. He's from Bulgaria and he's drinking a Bulgarian wine. Ooh. And I asked him if he had any recommendations for what he wanted to hear tonight for Eastern European music. And I think his response was, Eastern Europeans have the worst taste in music.
Well, they were kind of a tough band.
So I was like,
I was thinking, this was probably one of the hardest like musical pairings that me and Caitlin have done. And I felt like I kind of did like the cheaters way out and went for Back in the USSR. I'm like, okay. Yeah.
There's kind of
a gap. Like you can go back to like, Franz Liszt or Mahler, you can go like very high tone classical. We actually have done dinners where which we actually found out, we did things with the symphony in San Francisco where we actually found out what the composers were drinking. And then we supplied that wine so they could have dinners in the symphony where they could drink. And because, a lot of these composers were on royal appointment. So there were seats. You actually know what they drank and how much.
That's pretty crazy.
You can go with that pairing. And then there's some good, modern hip hop going on over there. They have some stuff to complain about.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Eric, thank you so much for being on the show. I feel I feel like I didn't have to do anything this episode. Like, great. I just got to sit here and be like,
We didn't even cover half the stuff, but it was good. It was fun to talk about.
I believe there was a big long list of questions, and we made it to 2.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm not known for being concise, so.
Time flies when you're having fun, or your kids need to be put to bed. So.
Yeah. Okay. I think as long as people want to like make some of these foods, maybe travel once the world opens up again, or just kind of break the routine. These are all great wines and things to do it. You can Google a recipe, Spotify something, do a little armchair traveling while we're all confined.
Yeah. And we put on our Instagram, in case you guys didn't see it earlier, places where you can find Danch and Granger wines. So definitely be on the lookout for them. Eric, unfortunately, does not do direct to consumer. So you can only find it at a wine shop or a really cool restaurant that maybe is open and maybe isn't. So those are where you can find the wines, and definitely be on the lookout for them. And there you go. And Eric, I hope you're ready to sign up for our coffee table calendar, because we didn't tell you that that's part of being on our show. Is now you are a Miss November. I hope that you're okay with that.
Nice circus team. I think it'd be great.
Okay, so next week, what are we doing, Britt? Next week?
Well, we're taking a week off for Thanksgiving. So next week we're going to talk about the wines that we want to drink with Thanksgiving. Part of me feels like this one would go perfect, but
and also part 2 of that topic is Beaujolais Nouveau, because it's Nouveau Day.
Right.
Nouveau Day is next Thursday. So if you can go out and get a Nouveau wine, they are literally released that day. So if you can't get it before the show, that's okay. But yeah.
I'm curious to know, because I had talked to a few of the wine shops around here that normally make a big deal out of Beaujolais Nouveau, and they get a bunch of the releases. And they were saying that they weren't getting a lot from France this year because of the maybe COVID stuff. So I'm curious. What?
Because of the tariffs?
Tariffs? Okay.
Maybe it's going to be a Cru Beaujolais season.
Yeah, maybe. Well, either way, if you can find any Beaujolais Nouveau on next Thursday, that's when it's released. I don't know if it can be sold before that officially. So if you're
I think it can be. Yeah.
I just wasn't sure if there was some tiny little workaround where Trader Joe's does George DeBoeuf or something. I don't know.
They just declassify it.
Yeah. So if actually somebody told me they saw a George DeBoeuf Beaujolais Nouveau on sale recently, and I was like, that is from last year.
Yeah, that's definitely a 2019. That's definitely.
Don't do that. Well, anyway, if you can find a Beaujolais Nouveau, we're definitely going to be giving an ode to that, because it's such an exciting holiday. Normally, I like to celebrate it pre-COVID times. And then we're going to talk about what you should bring to Thanksgiving and drink with your turkey dinner. So turkey, ham dinner, we'll give you some options. So bring a bottle, any bottle. It's going to be a blast. We can't wait. Anything else? What am I forgetting, Britt?
Stay thirsty.
Everyone, stay thirsty.
Thank you again, Eric. Such a good episode. Oh, I'm going to be drinking way more Eastern European wines. Honestly, I feel like I'm the person who brings them to Thanksgiving so nobody else drinks them. I'll be quite honest. I'm like, oh, great. You don't want to drink this fucking weird wine? Guess who gets it all? Me.
And I do want to add one final note that I didn't mention earlier, is that obviously Catherine Granger, who's the other half of this company, who all the aforementioned logistics and label approval and FDA and shipping and email threads that go into the double digits as you go down, she's the one that makes that possible. So I do want to make sure that she gets a proper.
Yes, Catherine. I love lady bosses. We love ladies who take care of the shit. Okay, Eric. Yeah, your personality. She's the backbone. It sounds.
She is the mother hen. So you gotta. I just walk around and crow in the morning. She actually takes care of things and makes sure we have what we need to go on.
Yes, and everyone follow Danch and Granger Selections on their Instagram. What is it? At Danch and Granger Selections.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds like it. Look for their wines everywhere you shop. And if they're not there, ask the person, be like, oh, why don't you have these wines? You should be have these wines here. So do that.
Feel free to be annoying and condescending on my behalf.
Exactly.
Who runs the world? Just need to get that.
Thanks again. And you have to dance out to our outro music with us. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I have to hum it myself. So let's see if it's gonna work today.
Can I? Will I hear it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Like a Kraftwerk vibe. Keep it. You should have played Kraftwerk.
Just so you know, this was done on an analog synthesizer at about 11 o'clock at night.
With the glasses across. Yeah.
Yep.
Everybody, thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for tuning in. Tune in next week, and we're so happy to have you here. Tell your friends. More people should watch this show because I'm sorry, this was a great episode.
Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this, and thank you for inviting me, both of you guys.